Hey everyone, happy Easter. Today we're diving into something that's been bothering me for years. Why gacha games so often, well, let's be honest, they kind of suck. And I'm not just talking about occasionally bad writing or translation issues. I'm talking about a fundamental problem that plagues almost every gacha game out there. As I said in a previous video, I've been playing gacha games for the past 11 years. Yes, 11 years of my life spent collecting digital characters, watching stories unfold, and yes, occasionally spending money I probably shouldn't have. I've been there since the early days of Brave Frontier and Love Live, all the way through my current obsession with Epic 7 and Wuthering Waves. And throughout this entire journey, I've noticed something. While the graphics get better, the gameplay gets more sophisticated, and the gacha mechanics get, well, more predatory. One thing has remained consistently problematic: the storytelling. But here's the thing, it's not always for the reason you might think. Sure, the constant need to introduce new shiny characters to keep the money flow is part of the problem, but there's something much more fundamental going on. The real issue? This story can't end. Think about it. If the main story reaches a satisfying conclusion, what happens to the game? The company can't just shut down a profitable game because the story is over, so instead we get these endless narrative loops, forced continuations, and increasingly convoluted plot lines that keep the game alive while slowly killing the story's soul. Today, I'm going to break down exactly why this happens, show you some examples of games that got caught up in this trap, highlight a rare example that's apparently doing it right, and dive deep into my personal experience with Fate Grand Order, a game I played religiously for 7 years until sadly I lost my account, and the perfect case study of this problem. So if you ever found yourself tapping through dialogue just to get to the gameplay, or wondering why that amazing story setup led to such a disappointing payoff, stick around. We're about to get into why gacha stories are structurally designed to disappoint us. Let's start by talking about the fundamental problem that plagues gacha games storytelling. It's something I like to call the perpetual narrative dilemma. Think about your favorite game, movie, or anime. What makes those stories satisfying? They have a beginning, a middle, and most importantly, ending. A good ending provides closure, resolves conflicts, and gives meaning to everything that came before it. But gacha games? They can't end. At least not while they're still profitable. See, gacha games aren't just games, they're services, ongoing revenue streams for the companies. The moment a game stops making money, it gets shut down. But if it is making money, the story has to continue, even if the natural conclusion has already been reached. This creates an impossible situation for writers. They are forced to keep extending stories that were never designed to be endless. It's like after Return of the Jedi, we got 50 more Star Wars movies. Oh, wait, bad example. Sorry about that, but you get what I mean, right? The result is stories that meander, introduce random new threats, or completely abandon established plotlines in favor of new ones. The narrative equivalent of treading water. Lots of motion, but you're not actually going anywhere. And this isn't just a minor annoyance, it fundamentally breaks storytelling. Characters can't have meaningful growth because they need to remain in the state where they can continue adventuring forever. Villains can't truly be defeated because what would drive the next chapter? And the stakes? They can never be truly world-ending because, well, the world needs to stick around for the next month's banner, right? This is why even gacha games with amazing writing and interesting characters often leave us feeling unsatisfied. It's not just bad writers, it's structural impossibility built into the business model. Now, I've been in this gacha roller coaster for over a decade, and I've seen this pattern play out again and again. Let me take you through my personal journey with these games. It all started in the early days with Brave Frontier. Man, that takes me back when gacha games were still finding their footing. The story was simple. You're a summoner. There are monsters. Go fight them. Easy, right? But as the game got popular, they kept adding more and more content. What started as a straightforward adventure quickly spiraled into a dimension-hopping alternative realities and increasingly powerful enemies that made previous war-ending threats look like minor inconvenience. Then came Love Life. Being an idol management game, the story was more grounded in reality. But even there, you could see the struggle. The original story about saving a school through an idol group had a natural conclusion, but the game was making money, so they had to keep going. New school, new characters, new challenges that somehow never let our characters graduate and move on with their lives. Sound familiar? Fast forward to today, and I'm deep into Epic 7 and Wuthering Waves. Epic 7 has some genuinely fantastic world building and character writing. The main storyline had a real potential, but 5 episodes in, we're still introducing new continents, new ancient threats, and new chosen one. The character roster is so bloated that characters who were central to the plot in early episodes barely get mentioned anymore. I'm looking at you, Russ. Wuthering Waves is newer, and why I loved 2.2's story, especially Cantarella, which I will have an entire video about her and her story, so subscribe to be notified when it drops if you want to know why. I can already see the same patterns forming. Great initial premise, interesting world, but the story is clearly structured to never reach a true conclusion. In the early days, I was just happy to have any story in a mobile game. Now I expect more. But the fundamental limitations haven't changed. The business model still dictates that these stories can never truly end, and that creates a ceiling on how satisfying they can ever be. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, the constant introduction of new characters. This is where the business needs and storytelling needs of gacha games collide head-on. Gacha games make money primarily through one thing: getting players excited about collecting new characters. And to keep the revenue flowing, they need to keep releasing new characters forever. This creates an obvious problem for storytelling. Imagine if halfway through Lord of the Rings, Tolkien suddenly introduces 12 new Fellowship members, each more powerful than Gandalf. It would break the narrative, but this is exactly what happens in gacha games, month after month, year after year. Take Epic 7 again. The game launched with a core cast that had clear roles in the story. But now we have hundreds of characters, many of whom had a brief moment in the spotlight during their banner event, Bellona Tamarind Royal, and then fade into the background, never to meaningfully impact the main story again. And it's not just about quantity, there's also the issue of power creep, which granted some gachas handle it better than others, yet still each new character generally needs to be more powerful or more desirable than previous ones to get players to spend. Suddenly there are new forms of magic, ancient seared powers, or technologies from another dimension. The world building becomes increasingly convoluted, not because it serves the story, but because it serves the gacha. That being said, there are smart ways of dealing with these sort of things. Just take a look at Epic 7's Chaos Gates and Moonlight Theater. What's particularly frustrating, however, is that many of these characters have fantastic designs and intriguing backstories, but they're rarely given room to develop because the game needs to move on promoting the next banner. It's quantity over quality, breadth over depth, and yet sometimes a gacha game gets it right, which brings me to a game I haven't actually played, but have heard amazing things about it. Let's talk about Limbus Company, a game that I haven't played personally, but I have heard it manages to navigate these storytelling challenges exceptionally well. Limbus Company is developed by Project Moon, no relation with yours truly, sadly. They are the same team behind the Library of Ruina and the Lobotomy Corporation. From what I understood, they've taken a different approach to gacha storytelling that addresses many of the problems we've discussed. What makes Limbus Company stand out is that it was designed with a clear narrative vision from the beginning. The story wasn't an afterthought or just a vehicle to sell characters. It was central to the game identity. Project Moon had already established their universe through previous games, giving them a solid foundation to build upon. From what I've heard, they've managed to introduce new characters without undermining established ones by carefully integrating them into the existing lore. New characters don't just appear out of nowhere, they have connections to the world and other characters that make sense within the established narrative. But perhaps most importantly, Limbus Company reportedly structures its story in a way that allows for satisfying narrative arcs while still leaving room for continuation. Rather than one endless main story, they use more of an episodic approach with clear beginnings, middles, and ends for major story arcs. This shows that the problems I've been describing aren't inevitable. With the right approach and prioritization, gacha games can tell compelling stories, but it requires the developers to value narrative integrity alongside commercial success, which is unfortunately rare in this industry, especially nowadays. Now, let's talk about the perfect case study of both the potential and pitfalls of gacha storytelling. A game I spent 7 years of my life playing. This is what I consider the perfect case study of this whole phenomenon. Fate Grand Order, or FGO as it's known to fans. What makes FGO so interesting is that it actually managed to do something most gachas never achieve. It told a complete, cohesive story with a genuinely satisfying conclusion. And then it kept going anyway. For those unfamiliar, FGO's original storyline, known as the Grand Order arc, or Part 1, followed a clear narrative structure. Humanity was incinerated. Yeah, remember what I said earlier about stakes and gachas not being able to have the world ending? Yeah, scratch that, cause Nasu literally was like, but what if not only the entire world was destroyed, but also the entire human history? And now, you, as the last surviving master, had to travel through various points in history to fix singularities in the timeline and save the world. It had a clear goal, escalating stakes, and most importantly, a definitive ending with the defeat of the main antagonist. And that ending was so good, it wrapped up characters' arcs, paid off foreshadowing, and delivered an emotional climax that felt earned. If FGO had ended there, it would have been one of the rare gacha games with a complete and satisfying narrative. But here's the thing, the game was making obscene amounts of money. We're talking about billions of dollars. There was absolutely no way they were going to shut it down just because the story had reached its natural conclusion. So, what did they do? They created the Epic of Remnant as a transitional epilogue and then launched into Part 2, Cosmos of the Lost Belt. While Epic of Remnants was okay, As I said, it felt like a nice epilogue to the completed story, and some even felt like it tied loose ends or even gave more depth to characters, like seeing Jalter in modern day Shinjuku and wearing modern day clothes. The Lost Bells, however, were alternate histories that had been pruned from the main timeline. Essentially parallel worlds that should not exist. It was a clever concept, but you could feel these were ideas that had been left on the cutting room floor during the planning of part 1. They felt like lost ideas that have been revived out of necessity. Pun intended. Don't get me wrong, some of the Lost Belts had phenomenal writing. The Russian and Chinese Lost Belts in particular had moments that generally moved me. Then again, I personally think anything Gen Urobuchi writes is going to be phenomenal. But as a whole, the narrative lacked the tight cohesion of part 1. New threats and concepts were introduced that contradicted or diminished what came before. Characters who had completed their arcs were brought back for increasingly contravened reasons. And let's not forget what they did to my girl Mashu. After the Lost Bells concluded, they launched Order Call, yet another continuation. The name itself almost feels like a meta joke. They were literally called and ordered to keep the story going despite having already wrapped it up twice. What's particularly interesting about FGO is that you can literally see the tension between artistic integrity and commercial necessity playing out in the real time. The writers clearly wanted to tell complete stories with satisfying conclusions, but the business needs the game to continue indefinitely. The result is a strange cycle of endings that aren't really endings, conclusions that become new endings, so just end it already. And make FGO 2. You already have enough funds to make it look even better than Genshin Impact. And for crying out loud, this time give us a real account binding system. And no, I don't count Arcade as FGO 2. Is there any hope for gacha game storytelling? Yes, there is hope. There are some potential solutions, though they require developers to prioritize narrative integrity alongside commercial success. First, games should embrace a more episodic structure. Instead of one continuous storyline that needs to be extended indefinitely, they could tell self-contained story arcs with clear beginnings, middles, and ends. New characters and threat can be introduced in new arcs without undermining what came before. Think of it like seasons of an anime rather than one endlessly extending movie. Second, parallel universes and alternate timelines can work when implemented thoughtfully. FGO's Lost Belts had the right idea, but the execution sometimes felt forced. If planned from the beginning like Epic 7 did with their Moonlight Theater rather than as an afterthought, these parallel stories could provide fresh narrative ground without contradicting established lore. Third, the prequel-sequel approach. Instead of directly continuing a completed story, games could jump backward or forward in time. This preserves the integrity of the original narrative while still allowing for new content. Imagine an FGO that jumped 100 years into the future with new protagonists but occasional references to the original story. Epic 7 is currently trying to do this exact thing, with us going to the previous world of Epic 6 and the god version of our protagonist Russ. We'll have to wait and see how well that will turn out to be. Personally, I hope we end up seeing our Russ fight against the Epic 7 Genesis Russ as the final boss. Finally, and perhaps most radically, games could incorporate more player-driven narrative choices. If players can influence the direction of the story, each player's experience could become unique, creating replayability without requiring an endless linear narrative extension. With AI agents on the rise, perhaps in the future we might be able to see AI NPCs like Aura from .hack or Yui from SAO that will create and manage everyone's quest lines and story. The common thread in all these solutions is planning. The best best gacha storytelling comes from games that plan their narrative structures from the beginning, accounting for both commercial and artistic needs, rather than making it up as they go along. So, where does all this leave us as gacha players? Are we doomed to be perpetually disappointed by stories that can never truly end, or to endless narratives, loops, and diminishing returns? I think the reality is more nuanced. Yes, the business model of gacha games creates fundamental storytelling challenges that are difficult to overcome. But as we've seen with examples like Limbus Company and even parts of FGO, it's not impossible to tell compelling stories within these constraints. The key is for us players to understand what we're getting into. Gacha games aren't traditional narratives experience. They are ongoing services designed to keep us engaged and spending for years. Adjusting our expectation accordingly can help us appreciate what these games do well while being realistic about their limitations. That doesn't mean we shouldn't demand better. As the gacha market becomes increasingly competitive, storytelling quality can be one of the major differentiators. By supporting games that prioritize narrative integrity and being vocal about what we value as players, we can push the industry in a better direction. For me personally, after 11 years, I've learned to enjoy the journey rather than expecting a satisfying destination. I appreciate the characters, the world building, and the moments of genuine emotions these games can provide, even knowing that the overarching narrative might never reach a true conclusion. Losing my FGO account after 7 years of playing, it was a harsh reminder that nothing in gacha is permanent. These digital worlds and characters we invest in can disappear in an instant, so maybe the best approach is to enjoy them while they last. Appreciate the good storytelling when it happens, and not get too hung up on the structural problems that may never be solved. What do you think? Have you experienced these storytelling issues in your favorite gacha games? Are there games you think handle narrative particularly well or poorly? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this analysis, consider subscribing for more content about gacha games, their mechanics, and animes. I've got plenty more to say after 11 years in this wild world of digital gambling for anime characters. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.